everyone, welcome back. I'm the Book Guy. Today we're talking about Reckoning, the fourth book that just came out in the Songs of Chaos series by Michael R. Miller. Now, Michael's been a friend of my channel since like the very beginning days, like when I had 1,000 subscribers. He was right there, and he's been a wonderful support on the channel all the time, especially in my own journey of becoming an indie author. Michael is quite literally like the definitive gold standard of indie authors these days. He's doing incredible work. Now, I have reviewed the Songs of Chaos series before. I did this video with covering the first 3 books, and today we're just going to focus on the 4th book because it just came out on the 16th of September. In fact, I was honored to be one of the guests on the launch party with Michael Miller, and my friends Talking Story and Two to Ramble were all there to celebrate Michael Miller and the new book. That was a fun video if you want to check it out. But today we're just going to focus on book 4, so I'm not going to spoil anything major. No, not major. Nothing. I'm not going to spoil anything for the first 3 books. I mean, I'll be like, in this book, Holt, and you'll be like, okay, so Holt lives till the 4th book. Okay, you know, there's like the inevitable spoilers, but no actual spoilers. You know what I mean. But this is a review of book 4, and let's see, how well is the series going? Is it falling off the rails, or is it better than ever? I am going to take the stance that I think this is better than ever. I've read most of Michael Miller's entire discography, and I actually think this latest book, Reckoning, is his best work yet. He's really improving, going from strength to strength, and growing so much as an author, and it's wonderful. I love to see it. Also, we just love to celebrate indie authors around here. Not to mention, I really do think Michael Miller is one of the best indie authors working in the industry today, so we want to celebrate him and give a bit of recognition to the work he's doing. Now, let's look at book 4, and as I said, it won't spoil any of the previous stuff, but I am going to sort of introduce that series again for anyone who's watching this as a new one and wants to see how it's going overall. Anyway, the concept of this series, as you can see, you know, dragon riders, bit of a familiar fantasy concept, but taken with a bit of a new twist. As you can see on the front cover, our dragon Ash has a blindfold because he is a blind dragon, and in this case, they have to have a stronger bond than ever in order to accommodate and overcome this disability. In this world, the dragon riders fight against the Scourge, a horrible undead army of insectoid monsters that consume people and conquer whole civilizations, and the dragon riders are the one the guardian force that humanity has against them. So they're definitely an intimidating enemy, and the dragon riders have their work cut out for them. But at the start of the first book, the Scourge are starting to act with intelligence for the first time, and they are increasing their threat. So we're thinking there's some sort of deeper, darker, malevolent force behind them. But we're focusing on book 4, Reckoning, today. So what's special about Reckoning? What's unique by this stage in the story? And spoiler free. But at this point, we've got to search for allies. Dragon riders and our heroes can't do this alone. We need more people on the team. And there's also a lot of magical secrets in this world at this point. There's a lot of deeper magics and mysteries of the past that are slowly being revealed, and this world is just getting bigger and more interesting and rich as we go along. Not to mention, this book is also, can I just say, exposing evil plans as a vague, general sense. I'll leave that there. But I think one of the things that I love about book 4, and it's clearer than ever, that they're not just fighting the bad guy. It's not just about the monsters. It's about fighting the chaos of life and humanity itself. And in that sense, it's a much deeper theme. It's a perfect story because it's not just about the monster. You know, it's like the monster in all of us, that sort of story, but it does actually mean introducing greater depth and complexity to the story. By book 4, the world building has become surprisingly significant. Like, for a story that starts off as a boy riding a dragon, we think it might be a bit simple, but this ends up being a rich and multi-layered world. I mean, for one, we do have the monstrous Scourge, but we have, you know, the enemy behind the Scourge, and that's not the only enemy in this world. Again, speaking vaguely. But we also have the Dragon Riders. At the Dragon Riders have ranks, you know, of power levels that they go through, and at the very top of the Paragons, we have 5 Paragons. And then we also have wild dragons, dragons that are not affiliated with the Riders organization at all. These dragons have 5 elders, and each of these have different branches of magic. And so we actually get a pretty complex level. It's not just, this is one group, this is another group. There are multiple factions within these groups, and all of them have their own agenda and opinion about how this war should be fought. Of course, that's just the dragons. If you look at this map, you can see that the world has gotten pretty big by this point. We really do have a strong sense of of, who all the players are on this wider chessboard. The story starts off in Fiorlin, but then we get introduced to the Skull Empire, Rissalia, and Fjornheim. Like, there's a whole bunch of different people groups, and all of them need to be brought in to take on this great threat to humanity. And so, because there's so many different factions, we get the sense that the real enemy is not the big bad guy. The real enemy is chaos itself, which is, very on theme. It's the Songs of Chaos. But I love the way that this world is constructed. It's the idea that the threat itself is not the problem, is trying to unify to face the threat that's the problem. I think that's realistic. Now, what I especially love about book 4, and what really stood out to me, is that we have 4 protagonists and their 4 respective plots. You see, book 1 starts off very Holt-centric. Holt is our main guy. He's our young character who's got a coming-of-age story, growing up, finding magic, dragon riding, and realizing that the world is not as neat and tidy of a place as he thought it was. But by this point, we've got 4 main characters and 4 respective plot lines. So the story has grown beyond the more narrow confines of a single protagonist borderline young adult story and grown into true epic high fantasy. This comes with its challenges, for sure. I mean, I do think one of the potential struggle points of this book was that because we've got 4 protagonists, it's difficult to make them all equally important. Some of them felt like they were contributing more to the wider story than others. Other plot lines were good, but seemed weaker compared to others. It's kind of tricky to make all of them equally relevant. I mean, that's always the risk of having a story where there's multiple protagonists, where some people will latch on to those protagonists more than those protagonists, and they'll prefer that plotline to that plotline. It is tricky to make all of them essential. But let's go through our 4 main characters in this book. So first and foremost is Holt. Again, an inevitable spoiler to mention he's in the book. Like, I'm sorry about it, but it's important. Holt does have this coming-of-age story, especially in book 1, but it continues all through this book. As he learns and grows, he realizes that everything's more complicated, everything's more difficult. I genuinely love Holt as a main character because he's not a chosen one. He's he is an underdog. He's no one important. His last name's Cook because he's just a cook who steals a dragon egg to save its life. But no matter how strong Holt gets, he never becomes the single one savior of humanity. And I love that. I think there's always a tendency for that one rogue protagonist to change the entire world single-handedly. And I don't know. I don't think stories like that are potentially realistic. And I also think that they're not mature. I think it's almost childish, just to be blunt.
Let's go save the world.
But I like that Holt is not the center of the universe. He's just a regular guy doing his best. And in that sense, he's a very human character and very relatable. In this story, while he is developing and working on his magic and fighting, his big quest is learning new magical secrets and exploring the secrets of his power. And there are definitely some really satisfying can I just say revelations as a broad statement. Our second protagonist is Talia, and again, another inevitable spoiler. Talia is working as a leader and a politician, and I think in that sense she's got a really good juxtaposing plot line as opposed to Holt, who's a bit more on the front lines, action, magic focused. Talia has the strategist perspective, where she is the position of mastermind, where she's watching all the movements of the greater people, and she's got to find a way to make these negotiations work. Hers is in many ways the smartest plotline, even if it might be the bit slowest, Our third protagonist is Rake, and you will know him because he's our lovable rogue character. He's half human and half dragon. He has I'm going to call it like a magical curse. Like some magical stuff went wrong and he's been trying to fix himself. Now, the great thing about Rake is, despite the great global crisis, Rake doesn't really care about it. He's not trying to fight to save humanity. He's just trying to fix his own problem. He's a bit of a selfish character and we still kind of like him for that. But I love the idea of a character in a plotline who's almost disconnected. He's almost inevitably drawn into the conflict just by proximity. What he really wants is revenge. He doesn't care about saving others. He just wants to get revenge on the people who hurt him and then fix his problem and then get on out of there. Our fourth and final protagonist is Osric, and he is a fan favorite. I think he's my favorite. My God, this guy had all the biggest emotional moments of the book is Osric again. Because, again, I've got to keep it spoiler-free for the earlier books, but let's just say that he is searching for redemption. And again, he's similar to Rake, where despite the world falling apart, he's searching for personal redemption. It does mean sometimes his plotline feels like a distraction from the real threat of the series, and yet that it just delivers these heavy emotional gut punches. Yeah, it was good. It was good, that's all I'll say. Now, in reading book 4 of this series, it got me thinking, is this a young adult series? Because a big focus of it is a coming-of-age story, a young teenage protagonist, and it is about sort of defying authority. You know, book 3 is called Defiance, right? That's a huge element of young adult fiction. Not to mention, the prose itself is very direct and clear. You know, it's communicated in an easy-to-read fashion. It's not trying to be fancy. I think sometimes people will criticize a book that just has direct and clear prose, and so they sort of undervalue that. They think prose has to be fancy all the time, but I think there's a certain beauty in being just practical and efficient. You know, it's very easy reading. But again, is that young adult? Well, I do think in many ways this series is young adult adjacent, or at the very least, young adult friendly. You know, I think it is definitely, I think, high fantasy or adult high fantasy, but it's very welcoming and easy to read, which makes it young adult friendly. Something that book 4 made me realize about the series on a whole is that it's all quite morally complex, but in a good way? Let me put it this way. You see, we have stories like Lord of the Rings, where good and evil are pretty easy to distinguish. It's a little black and white. Not that that makes the story shallow. You know, Lord of the Rings is still a very deep story, but good and evil is a black and white concept for the most part. Then we have stories on the other extreme like Game of Thrones, where everything is morally complex and everyone's a bit morally grey. So if Lord of the Rings is 1 and Game of Thrones is 10, where's Songs of Chaos? Well, I might put it somewhere between a 2 or a 3. It's very much, you know, a bit on the simple side, but it is definitely introducing a lot of complexity. You see, Holt's story is in many ways about him thinking that the world is a bit more black and white, and thinking that if he becomes a hero, he'll fix everything, and then kind of realizing that everything's more complicated, and that people don't unite, and people are suspicious of each other, and human nature is a massive obstacle to fixing problems sometimes. We meet corrupt characters, we meet broken characters, you know, and Holt's idealism is constantly challenged. But what I like about this is the story is still at its heart an idealistic story. There is still hope. It is ultimately optimistic, thinking that while we can acknowledge the complexities of life, we can still believe in a brighter future and believe in the potential of humanity. And I think stories like this are, well, they're more important than ever. You know, dare I say, this is like a Star Trek story, but in fantasy, you know, where Star Trek will challenge the complexities of life and have big moral philosophical questions, and then ultimately still be optimistic in its belief in humanity. But this is one of my favorite things about the Songs of Chaos series, is that it is tackling more moral complexity, but in a slightly smaller, more digestible amount, so it's not so jarring. I think there's a push sometimes in fantasy to make everything as morally complex as possible, assuming that more complexity means deeper, and that's just not the case. I just like that this story has more complexity and still has hope, and that makes it exactly what I wanted to read right now. Now, let me emphasize, this is the 4th, not the final book. There is book 5 coming in approximately 2 years. There's usually about 2 years between these books, because they're pretty big books. I think they're all about 250,000 words. They are chunky and sizable. But the 4th book, I won't spoil the ending, but I will say it is very clearly setting up book 5. There is a clear sense of where the story is headed for our final climactic showdown. But I will also remind you that Michael R. Miller is not just doing Songs of Chaos, he's also done the Dragon's Blade trilogy before this. That was very much his practice novel that he wrote in his early practice trilogy, sorry, that he wrote in his early 20s. He's also done the novella, The Last Stand of the Stone Fist. That is well, it's a prequel to the Songs of Chaos series, but you should read it after book 1. He's also done a unique book, Battlespire. I haven't read that one, but that is more of a modern hacker story. And also, there is a short story that you get for free if you sign up to his monthly newsletter. I get his monthly newsletter, and I read the whole thing every time. It's really good. But finally, I also just want to end this with a shout out to Michael R. Miller. I don't know if you guys watching this will know this, but As an indie author, Michael is constantly talking to other indie authors just in the industry. I know in talking with John from Talking Story that both of us found Michael to be like a mentor to us as we transitioned into indie publishing. He answered all my questions. I went back and forth with him hundreds of times with, oh, I've got a question about this, and he sent me infinite, voice messages and emails just explaining all the questions I had every time I got stuck. So this guy's really doing a lot of legwork in just helping other people up. He's not, being a successful indie author and pulling up the ladder behind him. He's literally trying to make it as easy as other possible for join. So he's genuinely a good human being and someone I fully endorse. But we'll leave it there. Guys, book 4, I'll put a link to Michael's website in the description where you can grab that and you can support an indie author. If you want to support my work, you can check out my books, The Immortal Investigations and Urban Fantasy, or you can check out my shop or my Patreon. Otherwise, subscribe for more book reviews like this. And comment below, tell me your thoughts on Songs of Chaos, and if you would like to see other book reviews for me to cover, I'm more than happy to do that. Very open to suggestions. Anyway, I'll talk to you guys very soon. I hope you enjoy a good book today. Bye.